Silent judgments and criticism, though often subtle and unspoken, can have profound effects on relationships, communication, and emotional well-being. These behaviors stem from deeper emotional needs, unresolved conflicts, and unspoken expectations, often manifesting through non-verbal cues or passive-aggressive actions that create tension and misunderstanding. While they may appear harmless on the surface, silent easements erode trust and intimacy, leaving both individuals in a state of emotional disconnection. Addressing these issues requires greater self-awareness, open communication, and a willingness to confront the underlying fears and insecurities that give rise to such behavior. By fostering honesty, vulnerability, and mutual understanding, we can break the cycle of silent criticism and build healthier, more authentic relationships. Only through conscious effort and emotional growth can we move past subtle judgments and cultivate meaningful connections based on respect, empathy, and direct engagement. In the delicate dance of human relationships, we often find ourselves entangled with those who seem to be close to us, yet their true emotions remain veiled. Beneath the surface, there may lie a subtle current of resentment, often unnoticed, but ever present. It is not the obvious acts of cruelty or direct confrontation that we must be wary of, but rather the silent, almost imperceptible signals that tell a deeper story. One of the most difficult truths we must confront is that not all those who walk beside us in life do so with pure hearts. Some may walk in shadow, carrying with them a hidden disdain that has yet to be acknowledged. But let us not rush to judgment. This is not a moment for bitterness, but for understanding. The human mind, a vast and complex landscape, operates on many levels of consciousness. What we are aware of, what we repress, and what resides in the deeper recesses of the unconscious all interact in subtle and profound ways. One of the most powerful forces that shapes our interactions and relationships is the phenomenon of projection, a mechanism through which we displace our own unconscious feelings, thoughts, and others. This defense mechanism, though often invisible to the person employing it, can have a profound impact on relationships, shaping perceptions and influencing behaviors in ways we may not fully understand. Projection occurs when we attribute our own unconscious emotions, motives, or traits onto another person. This is not a deliberate act of manipulation, but rather a subconscious process to protect the psyche from the anxiety of confronting undesirable or difficult feelings. For instance, if an individual harbors feelings of anger or jealousy that they cannot face or accept within themselves, they may begin to see those very emotions in others. This projection acts as a defense, allowing the person to externalize the emotional turmoil they cannot bear to acknowledge within themselves. In this way, the person can distance themselves from the uncomfortable emotions, casting them onto someone else. In our interactions with others, this projection can take many forms, both subtle and overt. A person who feels inadequate or insecure might project those feelings onto their partner or close friend, perceiving them as judgmental or critical, even when there is no real basis for such perceptions. Likewise, someone who feels deeply envious of another's success might unconsciously project feelings of inadequacy onto that person, viewing them as arrogant or self-serving. In these situations, the individual is not seeing the other person as they truly are, but rather through the distorted lens of their own internal conflict. This phenomenon is deeply tied to the unconscious mind, which holds the repressed memories, desires, and emotions that are too painful or threatening for the conscious mind to process directly. The unconscious mind, in its wisdom, seeks ways to protect the individual from the distress of confronting these repressed feelings. Projection is one of the ways in which this is achieved. By shifting the emotional burden onto someone else, the individual feels momentarily relieved of the discomfort that arises from confronting their own unresolved issues. What makes projection so insidious is invisible. The person doing the projecting is often unaware of their own inner conflict. They genuinely believe that their perception of the other person is accurate. The feelings they experience seem real and justified, and they may feel victimized or wronged by the individual they are projecting onto. This lack of awareness can make it difficult to break the cycle of projection, as the individual is not conscious of the fact that their perceptions are distorted by their own unconscious material. Moreover, projection is not a one-way street. It is not just that individuals project negative emotions onto others. They can also project positive emotions or idealized qualities onto people they admire or look up to. In this case, the person projects their own desires, hopes, or idealized vision of themselves onto another person. This can lead to unrealistic expectations, feelings of disappointment when those expectations are not met, and ultimately a sense of betrayal when the projected qualities are not found in the other person. These projections can be just as damaging as negative ones, as they prevent individuals from seeing others as they truly are, with all their flaws and imperfections. The unconscious mind, however, does not act in isolation. It is influenced by the personal history and experiences of the individual. Early childhood experiences, particularly those involving attachment to caregivers, play a significant role in shaping how and to what extent projection occurs. If a child grows up feeling neglected or unloved, they may carry those feelings of inadequacy into it. They may project these feelings onto others, perceiving them as rejecting or critical, even in the absence of such behavior. Alternatively, if a person has experienced betrayal or abandonment, they may project feelings of distrust or fear onto those closest to them, expecting to be hurt even when there is no evidence to support such beliefs. The nature of projection is not static. It evolves over time as the individual continues to interact with the world around them. As the unconscious material shifts and changes, so too do the projections. A person who has repressed feelings of anger towards a parent may project that anger onto their spouse, even though the spouse has not wronged them. Similarly, an individual who struggles with feelings of guilt or shame may project these emotions onto others, perceiving them as judgmental or disapproving. These projections can shift depending on the emotional climate, the person's psychological state, and their external circumstances. Projection is also a key mechanism in the formation and maintenance of psychological complexes. A complex is a constellation of emotions, memories, and thoughts that are organized around a central theme or conflict. These complexes, often formed in childhood or during significant life events, can influence behavior in profound ways. When a complex is activated, the individual may experience a surge of unconscious material that they are unable to process consciously. In response, they may project this material onto others, creating a distorted perception of reality. For example, a person with an inferiority complex may project their feelings of inadequacy onto others, seeing them as superior or condescending, when in fact those others may be no different from themselves. This projection serves to protect the individual from the painful emotions associated with the complex, but it also reinforces the negative self-image and prevents the person from dealing with the root of the issue. This defense mechanism is not inherently negative. It can be adaptive in certain circumstances. In situations of extreme stress or trauma, projection can provide temporary relief by helping the individual distance themselves from overwhelming emotions. However, when projection becomes a habitual response to internal conflict, it can lead to miscommunication, misunderstandings, and fractured relationships. Those around the individual may begin to feel as though they are constantly walking on eggshells, unsure of how to act or speak in a way that will avoid being the target of the projections. Over time, this can erode trust and create emotional distance. The key to understanding and addressing projection lies in developing greater self-awareness, by becoming more attuned to our own inner world, the emotions, desires, and fears that reside beneath the surface. We can begin to recognize when projection is occurring. This process requires a willingness to confront the unconscious material that we have been avoiding. It involves looking at ourselves with honesty and compassion, acknowledging the parts of ourselves that we have kept hidden or repressed. When we are able to see our own projections for what they are, we can begin to understand the underlying emotions and conflicts that fuel them. This understanding does not require us to act on every feeling or desire we uncover, but rather to recognize their presence and their influence on our thoughts and behavior. Through this process of celebration, we can begin to take ownership of our projections and stop using others as unconscious mirrors for our own unresolved issues. It is important to remember that projection is not a personal attack. It is a defense mechanism rooted in the complexity of the human psyche. The challenge is to transcend the projections to see others as they truly are, and to engage with them in a way that is grounded in self-awareness and authenticity. Only by acknowledging the unconscious forces that shape our perceptions can we begin to see the world with clearer eyes and build deeper, more genuine relationships. Contradictory behavior is one of the most perplexing and complex phenomena in human relationships and interactions. It manifests when an individual's actions do not align with their words or intentions, creating confusion, frustration, and often a sense of distrust. This dissonance between what is said and what is done can take many forms, ranging from subtle inconsistencies to glaring contradictions that cannot be. Understanding the nature of contradictory behavior requires delving into the depths of human psychology, where unconscious motives, emotional defenses, and internal conflicts often collide in ways that even the individual involved may not fully comprehend. At the core of contradictory behavior lies the tension between conscious desires and unconscious drives. The conscious mind, which we typically think of as our aware mind, governs our outward actions, our goals, and our interactions with the world around us. However, beneath this surface, the unconscious mind operates with its own set of desires, fears, and unresolved emotional conflicts. These unconscious forces can exert significant influence over our thoughts and actions, often in ways that are contradictory to what we consciously wish or intend. For instance, a person may consciously desire to maintain harmonious relationships, yet their behavior may consistently create conflict or distance between them and others. They might speak words of affection and support, but act in ways that undermine or invalidate the very relationships they claim to value. This inconsistency can be puzzling to those on the receiving end of such behavior, as they are left to question the sincerity of the individual's words or intentions. In such cases, the individual may not be deliberately trying to harm others. Instead, their unconscious fears, insecurities, or unresolved emotional issues may be driving them to act in ways that contradict their conscious intentions. The root of this contradiction often lies in deeply ingrained psychological patterns, many of which are formed early in life. For example, someone who grew up in an environment where love and affection were conditional or inconsistent may have developed a complex relationship with trust and intimacy. Or, on a conscious level, they may seek out love and connection, but unconsciously they may fear rejection or abandonment. This fear can manifest in contradictory behavior, acting distant or cold when they most need affection, or pushing others away just as they are beginning to get close. These behaviors are not intentional, but rather a defense mechanism developed to protect the individual from the pain of potential loss or hurt. In other cases, contradictory behavior arises from internal conflicts between competing desires. One of the most common examples of this is the struggle between the desire for independence and the need for connection. An individual might consciously value their autonomy and wish to maintain a sense of control over their own life, yet simultaneously yearn for the comfort and security of close relationships. The conflict between these desires can lead to actions that contradict their stated goals. For example, someone might express a desire to be left alone and to not rely on others, yet their actions may reveal a longing for companionship or support. This can create confusion for both the individual and those around them, as the behaviors don't match the spoken words. Another source of contradictory behavior is cognitive dissonance, a psychological phenomenon that occurs when there is a conflict between an individual's beliefs, attitudes, and actions. When people experience dissonance, they feel uncomfortable and motivated to reduce the inconsistency in some way. However, rather than change their behavior to align with their beliefs, many individuals engage in rationalizations or justifications to preserve their sense of self. For instance, someone who holds strong ethical beliefs about environmental conservation may continue to engage in actions that harm the environment, such as excessive consumption or waste. Instead of confronting the contradiction between their beliefs and actions, they might justify their behavior by downplaying the significance of their actions or blaming external factors. This rationalization helps them maintain their self-concept, but ultimately leads to ongoing contradictions between their values and behavior. Contradictory behavior can also stem from unresolved emotional baggage or trauma. Individuals who have experienced emotional wounds, especially those that were not fully processed or acknowledged, may exhibit behaviors that are contradictory to their conscious desires or intentions. Someone who has suffered from betrayal or abandonment may have a deep-seated fear of being hurt again. While they may consciously want to trust others and form meaningful connections, their past experiences may cause them to behave in ways that push others away or sabotage relationships. They might become overly suspicious or defensive, or even test others in ways that provoke conflict despite their desire for closeness. These behaviors are not necessarily a reflection of the present situation, but are driven by the echoes of past emotional pain. Contradictory behavior can also manifest in the realm of personal identity. In the process of self-discovery and personal growth, individuals may struggle with a sense of who they truly are. This struggle can lead to behavior that appears contradictory to their self-concept or outward persona. For example, someone who has spent years cultivating a public image of success and strength may feel vulnerable or insecure in their attempts to reconcile these two facets of their identity. They may exhibit behavior that seems contradictory, representing themselves as confident and in control in some situations, while acting uncertain or fragile in others. This tension between different aspects of the self can lead to confusion, both for the individual and those around them. In relationships, contradictory behavior can create significant challenges, particularly when trust and communication are compromised. When someone's actions do not align with their words, it can erode the foundation of trust that relationships are built upon. Partners, friends, or family members may begin to feel as though they cannot rely on the individual to be consistent or honest. Over time, this inconsistency can lead to emotional exhaustion as others attempt to make sense of the mixed signals and respond to the ever-changing behavior. In many cases, the person engaging in contradictory behavior may not even be aware of the impact they are having on those around. They may feel that they are simply expressing their true selves, or they may be struggling to reconcile their internal conflicts without fully understanding the consequences of their actions. In some instances, contradictory behavior can also be a reflection of power dynamics within a relationship. An individual may consciously project an image of being caring, understanding, or generous, yet their actions may indicate a desire to control or manipulate. For example, someone may promise to help a friend or family member but fail to follow through. Or they may act lovingly but withhold affection as a way to maintain dominance or influence. This form of contradictory behavior is often subtle, masking a deeper agenda or insecurity, and can leave others feeling confused and disillusioned. It creates an environment where actions and intentions are no longer aligned, leading to a breakdown in authentic connection. The presence of contradictory behavior also suggests that the individual may be experiencing internal confusion or turmoil. This internal conflict can manifest in outward actions as the person tries to navigate their own emotions, desires, and beliefs without fully understanding what drives them. In these situations, the contradictory behavior is not a deliberate choice to deceive or harm others, but rather a reflection of the person's struggle to reconcile competing inner forces. Understanding this inner tension is crucial for both the individual and those around them in order to approach the situation with empathy and patience. Ultimately, contradictory behavior is a complex and multifaceted aspect of human psychology. It is a reflection of the many layers of consciousness, from the conscious mind that holds our desires and intentions to the unconscious forces that shape our actions in ways we may not fully understand. By exploring the underlying causes of contradictory behavior, whether they stem from unresolved emotional conflicts, past traumas, internal contradictions, or cognitive dissonance, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of human nature and relationships. In doing so, we can approach ourselves and others with greater compassion and awareness, helping to bridge the gap between intention and action. Passive-aggressive actions are a subtle yet pervasive form of communication that can create confusion, frustration, and emotional tension in relationships. Unlike overt aggression, which is direct and visible, passive aggression is characterized by indirect, subtle behaviors that express negative feelings, anger or resentment without openly confronting the issue at hand. This form of behavior can be difficult to recognize because it often appears to be harmless or even normal, masking underlying hostility or dissatisfaction. It is a complex psychological mechanism that reflects a person's inability or unwillingness to express their emotions in a healthy, direct manner. At the heart of passive-aggressive behavior is a deep-seated fear of conflict or confrontation. Many individuals who engage in passive-aggressive actions are unable or unwilling to express their anger, frustration, or dissatisfaction directly. This inability to confront difficult emotions often stems from past experiences, such as childhood environments where open expression of negative feelings was discouraged or punished. Over time, these individuals learn to suppress their emotions, leading them to manifest their displeasure through more covert means. Instead of voicing their feelings directly, they find ways to express their discontent indirectly, often in ways that are hard to pinpoint or challenge. One of the most common forms of passive-aggressive behavior is procrastination. A person may agree to a request or task but consistently delay or avoid completing it, creating frustration for others without overtly defying the request. Procrastination in this context is not merely a sign of poor time management, but rather a subtle way for the individual to express resistance or resentment toward the task or the person making the request. This action can be frustrating for those on the receiving end, who may interpret it as laziness or lack of commitment, unaware that it is actually a form of emotional manipulation or indirect defiance. Similarly, the use of sarcasm is another hallmark of passive-aggressive behavior. A person may make snide, cutting remarks that appear to be playful or humorous on the surface, but carry an underlying tone of bitterness or contempt. These remarks often leave the recipient unsure whether the comment was meant to hurt or was simply an innocent joke. The passive-aggressive individual may deny any malice if confronted, insisting that they were just being playful, which leaves the other person feeling confused and emotionally unsettled. Sarcasm, in this context, becomes a shield that allows the individual to express negative emotions without taking responsibility for their words or actions. Another classic example of passive-aggressive behavior is the silent treatment, where an individual withdraws communication or refuses to engage with someone in response to a perceived slight or disagreement. Instead of openly discussing the issue, the person communicates their anger or dissatisfaction by ignoring or excluding the other individual, creating a tense and uncomfortable atmosphere. This behavior is often used as a form of punishment, with the individual seeking to make the other person feel guilty or anxious without directly addressing the underlying issue. The recipient of the silent treatment may be left wondering what they did wrong, feeling rejected, and unsure of how to resolve the situation. In some cases, passive-aggressive behavior can manifest as stubbornness or deliberate inefficiency. An individual may deliberately make mistakes or perform a task poorly, not out of incompetence, but as a way of expressing resistance to authority or a particular situation. For example, an employee may intentionally underperform at work, not because they lack the skills, but as a way of signaling their dissatisfaction with their job, their manager, or a specific task. This passive resistance can be incredibly difficult to address, as it is often masked by the individual's outward compliance or seeming cooperation. The person engaging in this behavior may insist that they are trying their best, but their actions reveal otherwise, leaving others feeling frustrated and unable to confront the problem directly. Passive-aggressive individuals may also engage in subtle forms of sabotage. They may undermine a colleague, friend, or family member, withholding necessary information, offering advice that leads to failure, or inadvertently forgetting important details. In these situations, the individual's actions are often masked by plausible deniability. They may claim they didn't mean to cause harm, or that their actions were accidental. However, the repeated patterns of subtle sabotage leave the recipient feeling betrayed, unsupported, or unappreciated, even though they cannot pinpoint the cause of their frustration. The passive-aggressive individual, however, is able to avoid direct confrontation or responsibility for their actions, as the harm caused is often indirect and difficult to prove. One of the most insidious aspects of passive-aggressive behavior is that it allows individuals to maintain an outward appearance of politeness, cooperation, or agreeableness while harboring deep feelings of anger, resentment, or hostility. This duality can make it especially difficult to address the issue, as the individual often appears to be acting in a reasonable, even congenial manner on the surface. However, their actions speak a different story, leading to emotional confusion and distrust in the relationship. This can be particularly damaging in close relationships, where the inability to openly communicate negative feelings can erode trust and create a toxic environment. The reasons behind passive-aggressive behavior are often rooted in deep emotional insecurity. People who engage in this behavior may struggle with expressing their emotions because they fear rejection, conflict, or criticism. They may feel powerless in certain situations and, rather than asserting themselves directly, resort to passive-aggressive tactics as a way to maintain control or assert some form of influence without having to confront their own vulnerability. Additionally, individuals who have grown up in environments where anger or negative emotions were not openly expressed may learn to suppress their feelings and express them in more indirect ways. This can create a cycle of emotional repression where the individual feels trapped in a pattern of behavior that prevents them from dealing with their true emotions in a healthy way. Another contributing factor to passive-aggressive behavior is a lack of emotional intelligence or self-awareness. People who struggle to understand or regulate their emotions may not be fully aware of the impact of their actions on others. They may not recognize that their passive-aggressive behavior is causing harm or confusion in their relationships, as they are unable to acknowledge or process their own feelings in a more direct and constructive way. This lack of emotional insight can prevent them from making meaningful changes in their behavior, perpetuating the cycle of passive aggression. In relationships, passive-aggressive behavior can create significant emotional strain, as it fosters an atmosphere of distrust and uncertainty. The recipient of passive-aggressive actions may feel caught in a cycle of trying to decipher the hidden messages behind the behavior, unsure of how to respond or how to address the underlying issue. Over time, this constant emotional confusion can lead to feelings of resentment, frustration, and disconnection. It becomes increasingly difficult to maintain a healthy open line of communication when one party is unwilling or unable to express their true feelings in a direct and honest way. To address passive-aggressive behavior, it is essential for both the individual engaging in such actions and those on the receiving end to cultivate greater self-awareness and emotional openness. For the passive-aggressive individual, learning to recognize and express emotions in a more constructive, direct manner is key to breaking the cycle. This may involve exploring the underlying fears or insecurities that prevent open communication and developing healthier ways of managing conflict. For those who are on the receiving end of passive-aggressive actions, it is important to set clear boundaries and communicate openly about the behaviors that are causing harm. This can be challenging, as it requires confronting difficult emotions and addressing issues that may have been avoided or suppressed. However, by fostering an environment of honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect, it is possible to reduce the prevalence of passive-aggressive behavior and move toward healthier, more authentic communication. Distance and withdrawal are complex behaviors that occur in relationships when individuals begin to emotionally or physically disengage from one another. These actions, though sometimes subtle and gradual, can have profound effects on both the individuals involved and the relationship itself. Withdrawal can take many forms, from physical distance, such as avoiding face-to-face contact or retreating to a private space, to emotional withdrawal, where one person begins to withdraw their emotional support, affection, or investment. At its core, distance and withdrawal are often rooted in a person's internal emotional state, including their need for self-protection, fear of vulnerability, or unresolved emotional conflict. Understanding why individuals engage in such behaviors and how they manifest in relationships requires an exploration of the deeper psychological forces at play. When a person begins to withdraw emotionally, they are often reacting to feelings of discomfort, hurt, or fear that they are unable to process in a healthy way. Emotional withdrawal can be a coping mechanism for dealing with conflict, disappointment, or a sense of emotional overwhelm. Instead of confronting difficult emotions head-on, the individual withdraws to avoid feeling vulnerable or exposed. This withdrawal might begin with small actions, such as spending less time with the other person, reducing communication, or limiting affection, and can escalate into more significant distance, where the person becomes emotionally unavailable or distant for extended periods of time. This form of emotional withdrawal is often tied to a fear, rejection, criticism, or emotional pain. The individual may feel that their emotional needs are not being met, or that they are unable to express their feelings in a way that will be understood or validated. So, in these cases, the withdrawal can be an attempt to protect oneself from further hurt. Rather than risk being rejected or misunderstood, the person creates distance by emotionally detaching from the relationship. The more they withdraw, the more they may feel justified in their behavior, as it helps them avoid confronting the emotional discomfort that they associate with deeper engagement. The fear of vulnerability is another key driver of emotional withdrawal. Vulnerability requires openness, trust, and a willingness to expose one's innermost feelings and fears. For some individuals, this can feel like a dangerous or overwhelming prospect. Emotional distance becomes a defense mechanism that allows them to shield themselves from the discomfort of being emotionally exposed. By keeping their feelings at arm's length and avoiding deep emotional engagement, they are able to maintain a sense of control and self-preservation. However, this self-protection comes at a cost. The more they withdraw, the less authentic connection they experience with others, and the more isolated they feel. In romantic relationships, emotional withdrawal can be particularly damaging. It often leads to a cycle of miscommunication and unmet needs. One partner may begin to sense the emotional distance but may be unsure of the cause or how to address it. This uncertainty can breed frustration, confusion, and even resentment, as the person who is withdrawing may not express their feelings openly, and the other person may feel rejected or neglected. As the emotional gap widens, it becomes harder for both partners to reconnect, and the relationship may suffer from a lack of intimacy and emotional depth. Physical withdrawal, on the other hand, involves a person physically removing themselves from a situation or relationship, often as a way of avoiding confrontation, discomfort, or emotional vulnerability. This can manifest as simply avoiding certain spaces, such as a shared home or office, or withdrawing from social interactions altogether. Physical withdrawal can also take the form of refusing to participate in activities or conversations that might lead to difficult or uncomfortable discussions. In some cases, individuals may choose to leave a relationship entirely, retreating from it both physically and emotionally in an attempt to escape from the perceived pain or tension. The reasons for physical withdrawal are often rooted in an individual's emotional state. It is not uncommon for people to distance themselves when they feel overwhelmed by a conflict, when they need space to process their thoughts, or when they feel that the relationship is no longer serving their emotional needs. Sometimes physical withdrawal is a way of signaling to the other person that something is wrong, but without having to confront the issue directly. In these cases, the person withdrawing may hope that the other individual will recognize the distance and initiate a conversation to address the problem. However, this indirect approach often leads to more confusion and misunderstandings, as the person left behind may not know how to interpret the withdrawal. In situations where one person withdraws physically or emotionally due to conflict, the relationship dynamic becomes strained. Withdrawal can be seen as a form of avoidance, where the person who distances themselves refuses to engage with the problem at hand. This avoidance can create a toxic cycle, as the withdrawal itself becomes a way of avoiding resolution and perpetuating the emotional disconnection. The other person, left in a state of uncertainty and confusion, may respond with frustration, anger, or their own form of withdrawal, creating a situation where both individuals are disengaged and unable to resolve the underlying issue. In some cases, withdrawal can be a learned behavior that individuals adopt in response to past experiences. For example, people who have been hurt or betrayed in past relationships may develop a tendency to withdraw as a way of protecting themselves from future pain. This pattern can also arise in childhood, where children who experience emotional neglect or trauma may learn to retreat into themselves as a way of coping with the lack of emotional support or safety. As adults, these individuals may continue to engage in distancing behaviors in their relationships, even if they are not consciously aware of the reasons behind their action. Withdrawal is also linked to a deep sense of powerlessness or helplessness when individuals feel that they are unable to control the outcomes of a situation or relationship. They may retreat in an attempt to regain a sense of control. This can be particularly true when they perceive that their needs are not being met, or when they feel that their efforts to connect are futile. By withdrawing, they may feel that they are asserting some form of control over the situation, even though this action often creates more emotional distance rather than fostering resolution. In relationships where one person consistently withdraws, it can create an emotional imbalance. The individual who is left feeling disconnected may start to feel neglected, unimportant, or unloved. Over time, this can lead to feelings of resentment or insecurity, as the person may begin to internalize the withdrawal as a reflection of their own worth. If the withdrawal is prolonged or becomes a habitual pattern, the individual who is being distanced from may eventually become emotionally numb, or may even begin to withdraw themselves as a defense mechanism. This reciprocal distancing can create a cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break, as both individuals retreat further into themselves rather than confronting the issues at the heart of the disconnection. In some cases, withdrawal can be a temporary response to stress or emotional overload. People may distance themselves when they need time to process their emotions, reflect on the situation, or regain their sense of emotional equilibrium. In these cases, withdrawal can serve as a form of self-care, allowing individuals to recharge and regain clarity before re-engaging in a relationship. However, when withdrawal becomes a pattern rather than a temporary strategy, it can prevent the individual from addressing their emotional needs or from engaging in healthy communication with others. Ultimately, the dynamics of distance and withdrawal are deeply intertwined with emotional vulnerability, self-protection, and the underlying fears or conflicts that drive these behaviors. By understanding why withdrawal occurs, whether due to fear, emotional overwhelm, past experiences, or a need for control, can provide valuable insight into the ways in which individuals manage their emotions and relationships. Recognizing and addressing the root causes of withdrawal can help break the cycle of emotional disconnection and pave the way for more open, honest, and constructive communication. Without this understanding, however, distance and withdrawal can continue to create barriers to intimacy, trust, and emotional fulfillment in relationships. Judgments and criticism are forms of communication that operate beneath the surface, often manifesting in ways that are subtle, indirect, or even unconscious. Unlike overt criticism, which is direct and explicit, silent judgments are more insidious and often go unnoticed by both the person making the judgment and those receiving. These judgments can occur in various forms, from nonverbal cues such as eye rolls or sighs to internal thoughts that remain unspoken but still shape how we interact with others. Silent criticism can be equally damaging to relationships, as it fosters an atmosphere of tension, misunderstanding, and emotional disconnection. Over time, these subtle forms of judgment erode trust and emotional intimacy, often without either party fully understanding the reasons behind the growing rift. At the core of silent judgments is the tendency to judge others based on personal standards, beliefs, or expectations that may not be communicated or even consciously recognized. People often make silent judgments because they are evaluating others based on how well they meet these internalized standards, which may be influenced by cultural, societal, familial, or personal experience. These judgments are typically made quickly, often without deeper reflection, understanding of the circumstances, and they reflect a desire to impose one's own worldview or sense of correctness onto others. The individual making the judgment may not express these thoughts directly, but their actions, tone and behaviors convey a sense of superiority or dissatisfaction that can deeply affect the recipient. Silent judgments often stem from a need to feel in control or superior in social situations. When we judge others silently, we are often asserting our own sense of self-worth by contrasting ourselves against others. These judgments can be particularly potent in relationships where there may be an unspoken expectation of respect, validation, or reward. For example, a person may silently judge their partner's choices or behavior without overtly criticizing them. But this judgment can be expressed through passive-aggressive actions such as dismissive body language, avoidance, or sarcasm. The judgment itself may not be vocalized, but it is felt in the emotional undercurrent of the relationship. This type of silent criticism can be even more harmful than overt criticism because it is ambiguous and difficult to address. The recipient may sense the judgment but be unsure of its source or validity, creating an environment of insecurity and confusion. Nonverbal cues such as facial expressions, gestures, or tone of voice are powerful conduits for silent judgment. A raised eyebrow, a smirk, or a sarcastic tone can communicate disapproval or disdain without the need for words. These subtle forms of criticism can be even more cutting than verbal expressions because they go unnoticed or unacknowledged. The recipient of these silent judgments may feel uncomfortable or inadequate without fully understanding why. Over time, these nonverbal cues can accumulate, creating a pattern of emotional distancing and eroding the emotional connection between individuals. The person on the receiving end of these silent judgments may begin to feel as though they are constantly being evaluated, which can create feelings of alienation or unworthiness. One of the challenges of dealing with silent judgments is that they are often unconscious or unintentional. The person making the judgment may not even realize that they are conveying criticism or disapproval. These judgments can be a product of ingrained beliefs or past experiences that shape how a person perceives others. For example, someone who grew up in a critical environment may have internalized these behaviors and may unknowingly apply them to their relationships as a way of processing or navigating interaction. In these cases, the person making the judgment may be unaware of the impact their silent criticism is having on others. They may not even realize that they are creating an atmosphere of tension or discomfort, as these judgments are often automatic responses to certain behaviors or situations. Silent judgments can also be a defense mechanism, allowing individuals to protect themselves from feelings of inadequacy, vulnerability, or insecurity. By judging others silently, a person can maintain a sense of control or superiority in situations where they might otherwise feel threatened. For example, someone who feels insecure about their own abilities may silently judge others as a way of deflecting attention from their own perceived shortcomings. This form of silent criticism can serve as a shield against the fear of being judged themselves. However, it also perpetuates a cycle of emotional distance and disconnection, as the person being judged may feel that they are constantly under scrutiny or that they are not accepted for who they truly are. In relationships, silent judgments can create a toxic dynamic where both parties are reluctant to communicate openly and honestly. The person making the judgment may withhold their true feelings, not wanting to rock the boat or cause conflict. But this silence can breed resentment and frustration. The recipient of the silent judgment may feel confused or hurt, as they are not given the opportunity to address the issue directly. In these situations, both individuals may become trapped in a pattern of passive-aggressive behavior, where they communicate their dissatisfaction through indirect means rather than engaging in open dialogue. This can create an emotionally charged environment where neither person feels heard or understood, and the relationship may deteriorate as a result. Silent judgments are often fueled by unspoken expectations or assumptions. When we silently judge others, we are often operating from a place of expectation, expecting them to behave, think, or feel in a certain way that aligns with our own values or world. These expectations can create a sense of frustration or disappointment when others fail to meet them, even if those expectations have never been explicitly communicated. For example, a partner might silently judge the other for not being as affectionate as they would like, without ever expressing their need for affection. This unspoken expectation creates a gap in understanding, where both parties are left wondering why the relationship feels unbalanced or unsatisfying. Without open communication, silent judgments can fester, leading to a buildup of unresolved tension. In many cases, silent judgments are an attempt to exert control or influence over others without directly challenging them. Instead of addressing an issue head-on, the person making the judgment may try to manipulate the situation through subtle forms of criticism. This could take the form of guilt-tripping, withholding affection, or making passive-aggressive comments that suggest disapproval. By using silence or indirect criticism, the person avoids the discomfort of direct confrontation, but they also prevent the relationship from progressing toward resolution. The person receiving the judgment may feel powerless or frustrated, as they are left to navigate a situation that is murky and unclear. The impact of silent judgments on self-esteem can be profound. When we are subjected to silent criticism, we may begin to question our own worth or validity. The lack of clear communication means that the recipient is left to interpret the nonverbal cues or subtle remarks, often leading to feelings of insecure or self-doubt. This can be especially damaging in close relationships where individuals rely on open communication and mutual support. When silent judgments persist, the person on the receiving end may feel emotionally unsupported or rejected, even though the judgment was never explicitly stated. Over time, this can erode the foundation of trust and intimacy in the relationship, as the individual may feel that they are constantly walking on eggshells, uncertain of their place in the relationship. Silent judgments can also affect mental health by creating an environment of chronic stress and anxiety. The ambiguity of silent criticism makes it difficult for the recipient to understand the true nature of the relationship or to address the underlying issues. They may feel trapped in a cycle of trying to decode the other person's feelings, unsure of what is being communicated or how to respond. This constant emotional tension can lead to increased feelings of anxiety, depression, or emotional exhaustion. The person making the silent judgment may also experience guilt or shame, as they may recognize that their behavior is causing harm but feel unable or unwilling to address it directly. Breaking the cycle of silent judgments requires a willingness to engage in open, honest communication and to confront the underlying fears or insecurities that drive these behaviors. It involves recognizing that judgment, whether silent or overt, often stems from a lack of understanding, fear of vulnerability, or unexpressed emotional needs. By learning to communicate openly and respectfully, both parties can address the issues at hand and build a healthier, more authentic relationship. It also requires a commitment to self-awareness and emotional growth, as individuals must examine their own beliefs and expectations and be willing to challenge the assumptions that fuel silent criticism. Only through this process can silent judgments be transformed into opportunities for deeper connection and understanding.